truly beautiful. There is very little that's kind of fundamental that I would wish to change about it. I think all of the work that I'd like to do has to do with, I would say, a sort of refinement of character. That I think one of the dangers in a piece like this is obviously, essentially, it's a lyrical movement. But to say that something is lyrical, that's quite a generalized idea, not to say generic. And I think you can be a little bit more specific and precise, phrase by phrase, in terms of what is happening in terms of feeling and character, and therefore in really making very, very, again, precise decisions about what kind of a sound you're looking for. Because while your sound was beautiful and your general sense of the piece was very sure and true, and I didn't disagree with any of it, that sometimes I thought that long stretches of it went by without sufficient variety of sound, variety of expression. You sometimes didn't tell us as clearly what the important events of the piece were. Okay. So that's kind of what I'd like to explore a little bit. And so it's always a bit difficult to work on the first movement of a piece like Opus 110, because one of the real, I think, the most significant characteristics of the late period is that these pieces build, you know, and they really, they sort of come to full expression, full fruition, full bloom in their last movements, you know, whereas in the early period, you very often have a very substantial muscular first movement, and then there'll be a deeply expressive adagio, and then the latter movements are lighter. Here, this is very much music that's pointing the way. And so I'm just going to find in my iPad where 110 is, and then we will be on our way. They're not chronological for God knows what reason. And so I think what is terribly important about this theme is that it foreshadows the fugue subject, right? So what I wanted a bit more of in your rendering of the theme was the intensity of the rise. You know, you have the falling thirds, but the rising fourths. And the sense of going up step by step, really almost in a ladder sense, I thought could have been more powerful. Could you try once again from the opening? Find more of a chorale sound, you know, because already immediately in the second phrase, the texture is completely different, and you have a kind of a very conventional accompaniment and a single line melody, right? So at the beginning, I think rather than really emphasizing the top, what I would love would be the sense of soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and that the sound is really made collectively. I would say almost four equal voices. Yeah. Yeah, and to get the rise that I was talking about, I think you can think of the first A flat as a result of this, but then afterwards you're already leading there. And then when you play this, keep it in your ear the whole way so that you feel there's a connection, that it's not right, but instead. And then really move all the way to the F. Yeah. Good. Yeah, and I think part of, again, I think maybe we talked about this yesterday, or talked about it with someone yesterday. Part of the power in a subito piano comes from really believing in your soul that the crescendo is going to land on the next bar, so that you really aim, and then the last minute. and I think in this case it's particularly important because it's kind of an amazing thing that happens in the fourth bar, right? Rhythmically, there's a real regularity. Harmonically and melodically, it follows a very logical path through 3.5 bars, and then it basically comes to a kind of, it's like there's an ellipsis in the piece all of a sudden. I think that you can prepare that through the surprise of the piano, that it takes us out of the narrative that we'd been, and then we come back to it there. Play once again from the beginning. I think that you're trying a little bit too hard to play soft.
Yes.
Soft is not a goal. I think you have to have a character in mind, and it's he writes con amabilità, so it has to have warmth and love in the sound. So I think if you're trying to play small, you will never achieve that. So, relax your shoulders, relax everything from torso up, and I would say, make sure your arms are neither before you play nor while you're playing the note are they ever in stasis, because that's what leads to a kind of, it's very well voiced. It's not that it's uneven, it's just that the sound is a smidge tight.
Okay.
Yeah. Much better. Into the next. Yeah, and if you can think of, instead of thinking of the sound growing, think of it expanding, I think that there's something about the constant eighths, that the first 2 bars are very stop-start, right? You rest on this note, and then there's motion, and then you rest, but now all the way through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So just feel this kind of accumulation of not just of sound, but of energy. Once more from the beginning. Breathe the first chord out. Yeah. As long as you want, explore it. Yeah, so you're making the expressive moment. I think again, the place where the question mark occurs is here. I think once we come back to this, it should be preparing this, because again, what happens here is the normalized version of the theme. I think he uses to take you into it. Play just from the piano. So when I talk about specificity of sound, he writes con amabilità at the beginning. So this kind of very round, warm sound and a chorale sound. Now it's melody, it's single voice rather than, and it's in a higher register. Whereas this was warm, I want this to be shining, There can be, in the beginning, I would love a sound that has no points in it, that disguises all of the edges that the piano is so good at creating. Yeah. Here, a little bit of edge actually could be your friend, Something a little, something, it's the kind of thing of, looking at the sun and it being so bright that you actually have to look away. You can play soft and bright at the same time. And again, the rhythm of this is so unchanging and steady. I wonder again if you can use to prepare that after this moment when suddenly the narrative of the piece is disturbed, you then use the transition to actually create the new normal. Once more from there. it's a very subtle thing, but again, the first theme is all about this rise, right? Now you have a much more conventional rise answered by a fall. So, sort of, if you can show us the contours of the theme in your sound a little bit, just right from here. It was a beautiful sound, by the way. With absolute rhythmic regularity. And now open. Love to feel you reach in the sound. You go to the A first, and then we have the B flat, but now all the way to E flat. And in the first phrase, that's obviously very related to. But when that happens, then we reach what should be the climax, and there's the subito piano, right? Now we have the fulfillment, right? So the sense of really allowing the sound to bloom into the F, I think, would be wonderful. Play once again from... Instead of getting louder, think of the sound growing this way, not that way, So I think part of it will come from allowing the left hand to provide support. That, this is not the most friendly register of the piano in terms of making a singing sound. So I think you need the cushion. If you try to do it just with that, then God help you, So it's the kind of thing where, you don't want to play the left hand so loud that you bury the right hand, but I think if you play too little, then the right hand, the nakedness of that register is really exposed. Okay. Play just from there. Yeah, I think you're using too much tension and not enough natural weight. If I play just with tension, what generally happens is that the sound becomes narrower and tighter. And I think, again, so much of and there's a lot of it, so much of the music in this piece that's in the highest reach of the piano, I mean, obviously, the best example is the very end of the piece. What you want is this feeling of the universe opening, in the sound. And for that, you cannot be tight. The tightness will make the music, the universe shrink rather than expand. One more time from there. These dots, which I think are meant to be a kind of emphasis on the eighth. And then 1, 3. That should be the shape of things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3. And I also think that to contrast with those dots, your left hand can be a little bit more brushed. Again, it's this thing of not having your focus be exclusively on the beginning of the note. Think about the continuation and the way the note leads into the rest afterwards. D, dom, pom. Once more from. I wonder if you can get out of the key a little bit faster, so that there's a kind of a springy sense in those. So that they just pop. They stand out from the arpeggio a little bit more. Yeah. Very good. Yeah, and I think part of the deal of the 6 notes on the way down and the 3 on the way up is the feeling that up takes more effort. You know, this is a little bit like a waterfall, and then you actually have to work to create the rise. Dee, dum, ba. Once more from the same place. Like enough of an event. So harmonically, we've had a total absence of anything interesting for quite a while, right? 1, 5, 1, 5, 1. You know, so I would like your eyes to go wider when that happens. It sounded very good otherwise, though. Also, if that's where the crescendo begins. If you can make that the low point, so you have room to grow. And just actually to a couple of preemptive strikes. But so the harmony moves by bar, and when I say moves, it doesn't really move. It goes back and forth, and again by bar, but finally it moves to new destination. 2 beats, 1 beat, 2 beat, 1 beat, eighth, 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 eighth. So there's an incredible harmonic acceleration. It doesn't mean you should get faster, but it means that there should be the feeling of the music acquiring an extra urgency. Play once more the whole thing. Come down. Yes, then change again and again. It was much better. And this would be a place where actually a little bit of tension in the sound wouldn't be bad. You know, that there's a kind of a sense of pulling against the music, because then you want the opposite, a kind of total openness. Maybe just from the color change at the beginning of the crescendo was great. Just right there is fine. So this has a kind of a special character. There's something strange about these octave down and then seventh. To me, it's like just the most inspired yodeling you've ever heard in your whole life. You know, there is something though about that. You know, that it's something very, very simplistic, elevated into something amazing. And to me, it sounds a little bit too serious somehow. That it's almost, there's a little bit of an element of, like child's game in it, But it being late Beethoven, it also has a sublime quality. I mean, he can do both of those things at the same time. I wouldn't mind you getting into it one more time. So it's another one of those Beethoven subito pianos where the point is go and go and go and go and go and then away. And the point of the time is that all of the intensity, not just the sound, but the intensity that you've been accumulating has to go out of it before you begin. That it's purely lovely afterwards. Just the last bar is fine. And so really show us the rise. I think you're making the mistake that so many of us do so often, which is that in a dotted rhythm you think, oh, the long note is the important one, so it sounds a little bit like... But actually the little note is the one that goes by so much faster that if you don't give it attention, we won't notice it. I would love to feel that the variation is more different. So this is the simple version. Now you have the appoggiatura, which is always a kind of a side on every beat in each hand, right? The other thing is that it's a two-bar phrase where something happens at the second bar, right? Yeah, the way you proceed from the second beat to the third beat is not the same way as how you should proceed from the third beat into the next bar. Once more from... From here, da-dee-da-dee-da. Between the two hands, for these 4 bars, every single 16th gets played, right? And even busier, but still... So that then when you stop, there has to be some kind of a sense of gathering of energy, right? That's how you know that we're headed somewhere new. There's, again, he sets up an airtight expectation of the motion to continue because it's so unending, you know, until suddenly it stops. So I think that stop, you need to really find a new intensity for that. You can play one more time from here. I still think the little note sounds like the red-headed stepchild. Is that the right expression? And now more. Obviously, one of his favorite things in the late period is this thing of the extreme separation of the hands. So in a passage like this where you start more or less close together and then the hands start to pull apart, I really would love, again, the feeling of the pulling, you know, so and then the left hand goes lower and the right hand goes higher. That there's an effort involved in the stretch and the stretch and the stretch. Yeah, it's the kind of thing where it feels very good to push, but actually the resistance is where the music power will come from. Can you play from? And I would love a little bit more of the twos. About this conflict between the two hands is that the left hand is continuous, but the right hand, the rests are very important, so don't pedal through them. Okay. And each one should have the feeling of either like a violinist playing all up bows or of a singer having to breathe quickly. Da, da, dee. You know, the breaths in between the notes actually have as much character as the notes themselves do. One more time from there. And keep reaching. You know, that's because that is actually, this is the point of the greatest distance between the hands. I mean, just think about how much territory there is in between. And I mean, for me, it's a hugely significant aspect of him in the late period. For me, it's like it's a way of saying this is not enough. You know, he wants the absolute everything that's possible, and then about 20% more. So actually, I wouldn't mind the feeling in the sound of you stretching the piano past its limit. That's what's supposed to happen. That this is normal is not normal. This is about asking for more than any of us can have. Maybe just from. And can you keep listening to this note all the way? Also because is so important. Yod. This is not a beginning, it's yod. The enormity of that interval is deeply expressive. Yeah. One last time. This interval, which is 2 octaves plus a third, I would love for you to feel the tightness of the tightness is not the right word. The density of it. The density of it is so expressive. I mean, first of all, because there are suspensions in, but it's literally there is something about when notes are very, very close together or very, very far apart. That's when they're the most expressive. When music moves in a diatonic or in broken chord fashion, that's less expressive. So this has one kind of intensity and has another one. Maybe just from. Tempo and don't push sound. Really feel, again, pulling is always a better way. And reach farther. So let me ask you a question. Is that a resolution?
No.
No, right, yeah. So the silence is not a relaxation, right? So can you play into the rest and then feel the need for the resolution before going on? I mean, to me, that's like, I actually quite literally do mark punctuation in my music. And this is definitely a question mark, right? We're waiting for an answer which only very gradually comes. It's not like we get it immediately. But yeah, I think it's really important. I said that at the beginning that I wanted you to think more specifically about the character phrase by phrase. The silences also have character, and there's a variety of characters in silences. Sometimes they come at the end of a paragraph and they are a relaxation. Sometimes they are nervous. Sometimes they are They are a way of wrapping a bow around something. Sometimes they make something more intense. I mean, you have to really be clear about what role the silence is playing in the music, and the main consideration in figuring that out is what part of a phrase is it in? Is it at the end of the phrase? Is it in the middle of the phrase? Is it at a cadence? Well, maybe once more from. There's something about the way you're playing this note. I think, it's a mistake that we so often make as pianists. We think we can only control the beginning of the note, so we only need to think about the beginning of the note. But in fact, the note continues to be a living, breathing thing until its ending. So you have to think about the fact that it has a beginning, yes, but also a middle and an ending. And think of it leading into the silence, because it will affect the quality of the silence and the way you continue. That if the leaving of the note has a heightened intensity, you will not continue in a perfunctory way. Play just the last one. Still also a question and a half answer, but one that the only real answer finally comes with. That's where the resolution. So I guess what I'm asking is for you to keep the music open-ended all the way until there. Last time. Yeah, so in that little figure that you just played, from here, what is the most intense harmony? Exactly, yeah. So I would love for that to be reflected in the sound, that you begin in a more open way, and then that just cuts a little bit deeper. You can play from there, you don't have to play before. Just body. Yeah, to me that sounds a bit automatic. So I was saying before that, chromatic music is generally more intense than diatonic. So he starts diatonic and then chromatic in the middle, and then he goes back to diatonic. So I think in terms of intensity and sound actually, but I'm actually more interested in intensity in this case, crest in the middle. So. Let go and this is where this finally is resolved, and from there until the end of the exposition, it has a coda feeling almost, that there's no clouds on the horizon anymore. Maybe once more from. For that to work, for everything else that's still to come to sound placid in a way that's satisfying, 5, 1, we have to really feel the cadence. Feeling the resolution that you exhale into it. Okay. Maybe from there. I miss the warmth. I think there's something about the two voices working in tandem, that there's, especially this is a piece with an actual fugue, and then there are so many other places which are not quite a fugue, but they're fugal, they're contrapuntal. You have the voices kind of in argument or in conversation, sort of think of the middle of the scherzo also, where there's all this stuff going on. Mm-hmm. So moments when actually the voices align and they work in tandem, there should be something warm-hearted about it, So coming out of this, and I think if you want your listener to really note the fact that there are these two voices working together, I think you need to spotlight the lower one a little bit, because as listeners, we're so conditioned to listen upper voice, upper voice, upper voice. So without making a huge point of it, I would just put 2% extra on it. From there again would be good. Sound, not actually speed, but I think that even before if you don't begin from a place of stillness, again, I think maybe we talked about this yesterday, that we often forget that we need our arm for things other than transportation, that the arm also is the architect, that finger to finger you really cannot convey a sense of line, you have to do it farther back. Yeah. So you can see, just look physically at the difference between or, and it's not a lot of motion, but it's just the constant engagement of the arm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What's the goal point in the phrase? Where are you going to? Yeah. Can you aim more than? Good, very good. this too, I would love to be less beady. It has a little, a little bit of that quality. I can tell you how I practice it. I practice it first thinking of it as 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and then 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, so that you practice all of the options, so that what you end up with is a line that doesn't have any beginnings and any endings. It's in a constant state of rolling. Yeah. Not rolling forward, because it should be very, very peaceful. But I'm not going to ask you to practice it in public. But maybe if you could play it once with that sense of, the line being in a constant sense of motion, rather than there being any kind of, it's a wheel. Yeah. Once more from. Before we get into it, that is literally the last cadence. So we have to really feel it. I mean, he helpfully puts it in the lower register, so this one doesn't feel as final anyway as. And then you will let go. But it's easier to kind of let that kind of drift into the atmosphere if you have the feeling of the end, right? And that this transition is so magnificent in how stripped down it is, right? It's one bar, and what happens is he takes this sonority which has been rich, with you have tenths here, and then now you have a single voice, but with the full chord underneath, and he hollows it out. So whereas here I would love a sound that is warm and takes advantage of the richness of the writing, here, to the contrary, the feeling of, first of all, there's no harmony. You have simply the octave, but not just an octave. You have, again, so much space in between. I think that can be so stark, would be the word. Just from right there. At that critical juncture, I think we're going to have to call it, unfortunately. But so that's the idea that, again, I really don't think there was anything that you did that I disagreed with or didn't like even. But I just think that in all music, one needs to be incredibly clear-headed about two things. First of all, what is the character moment to moment? But also, what are the events that matter most? Because music, any half-decent piece of music, to say nothing of a timelessly great one, is full of beauties and it's full of events. And if you place an equal importance on all of them, then you don't give the listener a sense of its overall shape. Its overall shape comes from telling us, here are the moments where essential things happen, essential things change, and those are the ones that you have to show us at all costs. And then other things are slightly less important, and then there are many things that are still beautiful that are much less, I would say, structural. They're not the support beams of the piece anymore. So I think you can be a little bit more specific about that, and I think, again, because the piece is so incredibly lyrical, just that you don't fall into what I would call a sort of a generalized lyricism, that you make sure that there is emotional and sonic specificity all the time, but really, truly beautiful playing. Bravo.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.